Welcome to our first hybrid Marymount talks. Every time we do one of these, it seems to be a different format. I'm very grateful to those of you who are here physically present in the auditorium to give Father Giertych a sense that there is somebody out there. But as we know, most of you are joining us online, so welcome to you. This is actually the first time we've managed to do a physical in-person talk since 2020. So it's wonderful that Father Giertych is able to join us today. Before I introduce our topic and our speaker, there are a few practical announcements. So Father Giertych is going to speak for around 40 minutes. After that, there'll be a moment to gather questions that our audience might have. So those in the audience could be thinking of some questions, and during that break, there's a piece of paper and some pens over there for you to write your questions. Those of you who are joining us online, please feel free to use the chat. Mr. Hicks will be gathering your questions, and those will then be delivered to Father Giertych during that short break, and then he'll prepare the questions that he will answer in the section after that. We should be wrapping up around 6 o'clock, and I need to just point out for those of you in the audience, actually, we're fine. I was going to point out fire exits, but you're all students and teachers of the school, so you know how to leave this building through the door at the back. So the title of our speaker's talk today is, Does Faith Open or Close the Mind? And there's an implicit reference, I think, in the question, and Father Giertych will correct me if I'm wrong, to a common criticism which is leveled at people of faith, that there is something somehow closed-minded about that position, that situation. So there are very many different ways that we use the word faith. We can, for example, talk about having faith in somebody. We can have faith in an institution. For example, even a government, we could have faith in such a thing. In this sense, we use the word as a synonym for trust. And our IB theory of knowledge students who are joining us online, and we have a theory of knowledge teacher here with us in the audience, they are interested in faith as one of the ways of knowing that they study. So a path to a particular kind of knowledge. This is knowledge that might not exist solely in a religious context, but actually maybe even thinking about the acceptance of premises or axioms in science and mathematics. So to introduce our speaker this evening, he is a Dominican Friar. He has been the theologian of the Pontifical Household since 2005. And this, to explain, is a very senior role in the Vatican. It actually dates back to almost 1218, something around that. And there's a possibility, a likelihood even, that St Dominic himself held the position first of all. So the very strong link to the Dominicans. At the time, it was called the Master of the Sacred Palace, which is a rather wonderful title. Father Giertych also teaches moral theology at the Angelicum, which is the Dominican University in Rome. Father Giertych, who is Polish, also serves on the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith and the Congregation of the Causes of Saints. This is the congregation which oversees the process of canonization. So we're honored to welcome him to our community, both in person and if you're joining us online. So please welcome Father Giertych.
Thank you. I don't know how to address you, ladies and gentlemen or students. The question is, does faith open or close the mind? A common presupposition is that faith is the enemy of thinking. And often the white overalls of a scientist elicit greater respect than a bishop's mitre. And often it's held that faith is said to be subjective, emotional, an expression of feelings, whereas science and the human mind are to be respected. In the 18th century, the Enlightenment movement claimed that faith is superstition, and the movement elevated the reason. And during the French Revolution, there was an actress representing reason who danced in the Notre Dame Cathedral, despising faith. Today, in general culture, we seem to observe the exact opposite. Reason is no longer elevated. Reason has become skeptical. There's doubt as to whether the reason can know truth, whether the reason can be trusted. And skepticism and relativism lead to nihilism. Well, these are big words, I'll explain. Skepticism says that nothing can be known because our reason is intrinsically weak. Relativism says, well, everything is relative. There's no consistency in things, which makes all knowledge dubious. Whereas nihilism goes even further, and it says there's absolutely no order in things, no sense that could in any way be explained, because everything is intrinsically chaotic. So we cannot base our lives on any truth, on any objectivity, because everything is fluid, everything is changing. If these views are held consistently, there's no room, not only for any morality, but also for science, because everything is absurd. So obviously we cannot adhere to these movements, to these currents of thoughts. But many people think in this way. They think that there are only opinions. You have yours, I have mine, but there's no way towards truth, or even there is no truth. Only what is experimentally studied and proven is accepted. Well, if we are in this frame of mind, this means that such distinctions between good and evil, true and false, beautiful and ugly, and such issues as human nature, conscience, moral obligation, justice, charity, love, responsibility, liberty, are all purely useless words, maybe poetic, but empty. You cannot weigh them, you cannot measure them. Have you ever smelt responsibility? You cannot. And so the conclusion is that there's no such thing as honesty or responsibility and objective values. Again, this claim is obviously disastrous. But it's said that objective truths do not exist, so they cannot be known, and only the opinions of people can be measured. So a survey can be made which says what people in a given social group think about an issue, or what does the majority of people say. Well, if the majority are ignorant or plain stupid, their views may be counted and referred, but does this tell us anything about reality? It tells us only what the majority of people, who maybe are confused and stupid, think today, although tomorrow they may think something else. And if you protest and say that there are truths that are worth knowing, and they can be known, this is said to be an expression of your fluid, subjective views, or an expression of your faith, which is said to be an expression of your feelings and not of your mind. So today, in many segments of society, reason is understood to be skeptical, and faith is treated as something really sentimental, emotional, not worth bothering about. So, does faith open or close the mind? But first of all, what is faith? Why is it important? And how do we arrive at having faith? Well, I am speaking as a theologian. I am giving you the Catholic teaching. Faith is a gift that we have received from God at baptism, or even before. And we have to distinguish the faith that is a gift of grace from a purely natural faith, because we have a natural faith, which is an expression of trust, as you mentioned at the beginning. This is how we live. We do not check out everything scientifically. We trust the doctors, even though we have no medical knowledge. We trust engineers and architects when we cross a bridge, even though it happens sometimes even in Italy, that bridges crash. When we bite a piece of chocolate, we do not check out first to ensure that there are no nails or worms in the chocolate. We trust bus drivers that they will take us to the planned destination. We trust people we meet on the street. And it's only in terrible countries ruled by mafias and brutal dictatorships that people don't trust one another. And those who have lived in countries where there were long civil wars often do not have this immediate, spontaneous trust of people. And this is terrible. And they need to learn how to return to humane relationships. So trust is a sign of humanity. This is how we function. And we don't have to be ashamed of this. But this is a natural faith. Whereas the religious faith that we have from God is a similar trust, but it's different. It's divine. We trust God. It's a basic tenet of Jewish and Christian religion that God has endowed us with a faith, that God has spoken even before we have noticed this. So it's not a question that we were groping in the dark, looking out. Finally, we found God. No, God has found us first. He has spoken his word. He has enabled us to hear that word and react to it. And if that is so, it's a sensible thing to react to God, or at least not to ignore him. And since our reason is reasonable, it is a reasonable thing to treat God seriously. And we can engage with God because God has endowed us with the means for encountering him. And the first means is the faith that God has given us. Faith is a divine gift. And those of us who were baptized, certainly we have received from God faith, hope, and charity. But God also sometimes gives these gifts to those who have not been baptized or even before baptism. And so faith, hope, and charity are divine tools that God has given us. And they have been installed in the depth of our soul at baptism. And I like to compare them to a computer program that has been installed in our computer. And we often forget about the presence of this program in our computer. And at some moment, we have to do something new, and we don't know how to do it, and think, oh, I have to buy a new program and pay for it and install it in my computer. And then I discover it's already there in the computer. And a simple click, and the program appears on the screen. How wonderful, huh? Now, if we have received the gift of faith at baptism, we do not need an extraordinary effort for it to appear on the screen of our consciousness. And even if we have not used the faith that was given to us, we don't have to be baptized again. It's there in the depth of the soul, and we only need to elicit it. Now, what's the purpose of this divine gift? Well, I will answer by quoting a great saint of the Catholic Church, who was also a Dominican, a member of my religious order, St. Thomas Aquinas. He lived in the 13th century, and he said that the virtue of faith that we receive from God has two functions. First of all, it ignites the supernatural, eternal life in us. And second, it enables our mind to reach out towards that which is not evident. Both moments are important. Faith sparks the inner life of God within us. And this is extraordinary. Within God, there is life, there is love, there's constant change, there's constant movement. And that supernatural life is not only a distant prize for us to enjoy in heaven after we die, it's available now. So whenever we make an act of faith, extending our mind towards God, that inner life of God in an invisible but real way, like an underground stream, flows out of God and touches us from within. This is something that we don't immediately feel, though as we live out our life in faith, something of that divine life and love manifests itself within us. Do you remember that story mentioned in the Gospel of the woman who was suffering from a flow of blood? She spent a lot of money on doctors to no avail. And according to the understanding of the time, she was held to be unclean. So she was excluded from the community. But when Jesus came to the village, she went into the crowd, and with her finger, she touched the hem of Jesus's cloak. She touched him with her finger, but in a deeper way, she touched him with her faith, trusting that she will be healed. And Jesus immediately reacted, saying, somebody has touched him. And the disciples said, you're crazy. Of course, somebody touched you in the middle of a crowd. But Jesus said, no, somebody has touched me. And the gospel tells us that Jesus was touched in a special way, and he noticed that power came out of him. There's a great teaching in this story. When we touch Jesus in faith, immediately divine power comes out of him. We don't necessarily notice this, but he does. And there's joy in God, whenever amongst humans there is faith, because God then can give himself. There's the joy of the gift of self. There's more joy in giving than in receiving. And the divine persons want to experience that fun, that joy of showering us with divine power. So we see the significance of faith. As we express faith in a moment of prayer, we reach out to Jesus and we touch him. And there's a point of contact between us and God. And when Jesus is touched, immediately he gives himself to us in a hidden but real way. So it's important that we believe in the power of our faith, because it enables us to touch God. And there is a second moment in faith. When we believe, our mind goes out and receives that which is not evident. Why is this so? Why is it that we cannot grasp God in a simple knowing? Why does God hide in a mystery that we can penetrate only in faith and not in simple knowledge? When we know something, in some way we hold on to it. We have it in our power. When you're doing experiments in the chemistry lab, you are over and above the thing that you are studying. In some way, you have the object of your study in your power. And if you don't have it, you want to have it. That's why you're studying, to know more, to have it in your hand, in your grasp. Well, God hides in the mystery, so that we will receive him not in a cold knowledge, as in a chemistry lab, but in faith. In faith, there is the humility of our intellect. We don't grab God, but we receive him in a humble faith. And there's a similarity here with human relationships. as we know one another, we have friends, we talk, we do not have one another in our power. Love to be true has to be preceded by faith and trust. And this is how we function in human relationships. And this is how God wants us to relate to him. So by hiding in the mystery, God has told us something very important about God. God is personal. God doesn't want us to treat him just as an answer to a riddle, to an academic problem. Of course, it's true that we can say about God that God is the absolute, the ultimate end, the prime mover, the cause of the entire cosmos. But God is more than that. God is love. And God wants to be met as the source of infinite divine and humane love. So by hiding in the mystery, which we can penetrate only by faith, we can engage with the living God, opening up to the mysterious but real divine life. And that's why in faith, we accept that which is not immediately evident. Our mind reaches out to the living mystery, and we accept that that divine mystery installs itself in our mind. Faith, together with hope and love, are divine gifts which enable us to reach out to God, to befriend God, to grow in that unique and special friendship that has been made possible between God and humans. And this is extraordinary. We could have never imagined this had not God himself told us about this. Now, how is faith born in us? I said it's a divine gift. It cannot be produced, worked out, calculated. It's a divine gift to be used. And it may grow in us as we use it, engaging with God. And faith may wither in us if it's unused. Can we talk somebody into faith? Come here and I will convince you so that you will believe. We cannot. Faith in its essence, in its capacity to engage with God, is a divine gift. In faith, there's also the reception of the truths of faith, and these are transmitted in the church through catechesis, through church teaching. The reception of these truths and locating them in our minds, the working out of conclusions from these truths, this comes from hearing and from reflection. That's why we need to hear the word of God. We need to read the scriptures and study the catechism. We need to study them and meditate upon them prayerfully. But the initial fact that we can believe God comes from God. A renowned English saint from the 19th century, John Henry Newman, said, "It is as absurd to argue men as to torture them into believing." If you try to force people to believe through our argumentation, it's like torture. It's useless. Faith is a divine gift, and only when it is in the soul can we build upon it. We can nourish it with the word of God, the sacraments, the teaching of the church, and we can grow in faith and love as we respond to God. But first, faith has to be there as a divine gift installed in the depth of the soul. And then we can live out the life of faith. Faith sparks the divine life within us, and that life has an inner capacity to live. When something is alive, a plant or an animal or a human being, the first sign of life is inner movement. Trees do not move around the forest, but they move from within. They grow, expand, produce leaves and seeds, and ultimately they wither and die. Also, animals move, and the movement of animals is different. It's from within. It's different from a ball that you throw and the ball is moved. There's movement from within. Similarly, the supernatural life that we have received at baptism, it can grow within us, enabling us to be moved from within by the life of God himself. So when you come to the chapel and you kneel or sit in front of the Blessed Sacrament, when you look at the tabernacle and in your heart you believe that Jesus is there, there's a moment of contact. Your faith has reached out from your soul to the hidden God. It has been exercised, and you're touching God. And when you touch God in faith, this is something like turning the light switch on. When you turn the light on, the electrical power coming from the power station proceeds to the light bulb and illuminates it from within. So when you make an act of faith, believing that God is here, you touch God, and God's power starts to transform you from within. So that's why it's so important to have a regular prayer time every day when you face God and believe that he's there. And as you believe towards God, you need to believe also in the supernatural power of your faith, because that your faith will touch God. Now, if you regularly practice faith in moments of prayer, then you'll find it easier to direct your soul towards God in various daily situations. When you're standing on the bus stop waiting for the bus, you can focus your faith upon God, and the hidden power will work within you. When you're facing somebody who's difficult, who's making you angry, you can silently make an act of faith, and your faith will then will reach God. And this will spark the hidden divine life within you, and it will enable you to see that other person with a pleasing approach, discovering that that individual is not as bad as you thought initially. So an exercised faith generates love, and loving people in view of God, through the power of God. Well, so far, I have not addressed the major question. Does faith open or close the mind? But so I need to get back to the issue. When we believe, we make an act of faith, and there's a movement of both our intellect and our will. Faith is primarily in the intellect, not in the feelings, but also in the will. Nobody makes an act of faith if you don't want to. Faith is not just in the emotions. The feelings are secondary. You may have strong feelings that accompany you in your faith at a moment of prayer, but you may not have them, and you may have contrary feelings. You may feel anger or sadness or pain. You may be in a hospital feeling pain, and yet you can reach out towards God in faith. Now, what's the function of the will in belief? If I say that I believe that something is true because I want it to be true, well, this is scandalous. It's atrocious. I want it to be true, so I claim it's true. No, this is not how divine faith functions. When we believe, the will doesn't impose anything upon the mind. It only urges the mind to go forward. The mind wants to know. Our mind is curious. We're never ultimately satisfied. We always want to know more. If you know something, you want to know more. Even if I think about the entire cosmos, the entire universe, I can still ask the question, well, what's beyond the cosmos? What's beyond the universe? Animals don't ask these questions, but I can ask the question. And I may not have an answer to the question, but I can raise the question. And every question is permissible. There are no stupid questions. Every question is permissible, even though not every answer that is given is correct. So our will in faith only gives a kick to the mind, telling the mind, go forward. The mind wants to know. It wants to know the ultimate answers to the most fundamental questions, and the will says, go forward. In faith, the mind accepts the encounter with God, the first truth, and also the truths of God that have been transmitted through the church. And the will urges the mind, go for it. Don't stop short. Go. Do not impose a limit on yourself. Do not put a cramp on your mind. Faith is not like a cap that you put on your head and it covers your eyes. No, the will says go forward. So the will doesn't close the mind in faith. It urges us to be courageous and accept the truth that God has revealed. And even more, in the living faith, the will urges the mind to go as far as possible and to reach God, the source of truth, and to see everything in the light of God, and also to act on the basis of the received power of God. And so in faith and love, we meet not just ideas about God, but the living God. And both our intellect and our will reach out towards the living God. And then God's influence has a bearing upon our behavior and our acts. Is this a denigration of a mind, a lowering of the dignity of the mind? No. Is it a denigration of your mind when you are studying and you're learning something thanks to the help of your teachers? No, you would have known less if you didn't have good teachers. I think you have good teachers in this school. So you're grateful for them and you're learning something more. And they are urging you to go forward, to study, to receive the wisdom of past generations, of scientists, of academics who have dealt with great issues and allow that knowledge and wisdom to transform you from within. And also in faith, the encounter with the living God. In this encounter, the reason and the will reach out towards the living God, who's the ultimate source of truth and love. So God's grace in no way does it wound our nature. And so our mind, our will, retain their natural functions. We are still curious. We're still asking questions. We want to know. We are attracted by that which is the universal good. So within faith, there is room for thinking, and we need to think within faith. We're still engaged in thinking, even as we have faith. We still use our mind, both on the natural level and within faith, within the engaging with God. We can still think on the natural level, asking serious questions and looking for answers. So all the sciences can coexist with faith. In fact, faith urges the mind to go forward towards the truth in its natural thinking. St. John Paul II, the Polish Pope, wrote in one of his texts that the mind has to go forward and not stop short in its questioning. And we have to go beyond the phenomena, the things that we immediately perceive, towards the deepest questions. And I can show this through a simple example. If you take a pencil into your hand, if you look at it just from one angle, just from here, well, you see just one point, because you're looking just from one point of view. But if you look at it from the side, you see it's long. You find out more about the pencil, and you can hold it better. But you can also ask a further question. What's it for? What is the purpose of this pencil? And this is a basic question that we often ask. Even children ask, what is this for? They see a watch, what's it for? The color, the shape, okay, that we can see that, but the basic question is, what's it for? What is the purpose? And the purpose is not something that you can measure, that you can smell, touch. But there is a purpose in the pencil. And today, many sciences avoid the question of the purpose, the finality of things. They observe measurable phenomena, but the question why is something that they avoid. Because if you ask why, invariably you come across some mind, some plan of the maker of the thing. The person who made this pencil, the company that produced it, there was somebody who thought about it, who gave it a particular shape and form and so on. So if we ask the question why, we come to the question of the maker, and the question of God. If things are sensible, if there's a purpose in them, then this points to the wise creator. And scientists prefer to shelve this question, leave it aside, and not touch it. But people ask such questions, and we cannot avoid them, and we have the right to ask such questions. And so John Paul II, the Pope, wrote to scientists and philosophers, do not be afraid of such questions. Do not close your minds. Do not stop short on the level of your natural minds. Go for the most important questions about life, about love, about the meaning of life, about human responsibility, about human nature, about the specifics of being human. Go for these questions. They are accessible. And your mind is not to be closed. It's to be liberated so that you may address these questions. The ancient Greek thinker, Plutarch, said that the human mind is not just like a bottle that you can fill up. It's more like a bonfire that has to be set on fire, set alight. The mind needs to be sparked so that in curiosity and wonder, it will go forward, looking for truth and finding it. And faith doesn't prevent this. It invites the mind to think, to go, to view things from a different, new angle, like looking at the pencil. We had the three angles from this side, and the question why, what's it for? We can study the human body from the point of view of anatomy and medicine. We can study how babies grow in the wombs of mothers. But we can ask not only the question how, but also the question why. Why is it that the transmission of life and the living in a family is such a wonderful, exciting adventure, and sometimes difficult? And when some people cannot manage this, they get things wrong and they're unhappy. And what have they missed? These are important questions and we need answers to them. So we need to think and trust the mind as it thinks, both outside faith and within faith. So, and also within faith, we need to think. We need to learn the truths of faith. We need to sort them out in our minds. We need to draw out conclusions from our belief. We need to ask questions and search for answers. We need to study the questions and the answers that wiser people before us have raised and worked out within faith. Faith, as I said, involves the reaching out towards that which is not evident. But I can still think within faith, and we need to do so. The answers that we will find will not necessarily be clear and simple. In faith, we are encountering the mysterious living God who remains mysterious. And we have to learn to accept the divine mysteries in our mind. And this is not always easy. But it's always better to respond to a question, giving a foggy answer, a misty answer that is true, rather than to give a clear-cut, simple answer that's false. Okay?
Thank you so much, Father Giertych.